Hello viewers, and welcome to yet another installment of the LOTR LCG progression series from Cardboard of the Rings, the bi-weekly podcast about the Lord of the Rings the card game, which is a living card game by Fantasy Flight Games. This is Mitch, and joining me as always is Matthew.
Hi there.
Today we're going to be taking a look at the third adventure pack of the Shadows of Mirkwood cycle, which is A Journey to Rhosgobel. So to start things off, why don't we go ahead and take a look at our brand new leadership hero.
Sure, the hero is Prince Imrahil with a threat cost of 11, 2 willpower, 3 attack strength, 2 defense strength, and 4 hit points. Prince Imrahil has the traits Gondor and Noble, and his response reads, after a character leaves play, ready Prince Imrahil, which is limited to once per round. I think he has great stats. Again, I've said this several times. The higher the threat cost typically means the better the stats, and that indeed is the case here. He's got the Gondor trait, which, again, you guys all know what I'm going to say. If you've been following the series, he might see some added utility once our current cycle wraps up. Beyond those two, what I consider strengths, we're about to have some major Gondor synergy, and his stats are pretty good. I do think that Imrahil really needs a deck built around him, so you need to be taking advantage of other cards that have character leaving play effects, cards like Sneak Attack, or the Horn of Gondor, maybe Valiant Sacrifice. There's a whole bunch of cards at this point, and more cards coming, that deal with characters entering play or leaving play. And so if you build a deck with that in mind, I think Prince Imrahil could be quite a good hero.
Yeah, something that the first time I ever got to take a look at Prince Imrahil in the original article when he was unveiled to us for the very first time, is it struck me just how similar he is to Aragorn. So not only are his stats almost identical, with the exception of him having 1 less hit point, 1 less threat cost, but he's also got some built-in action advantage effect. So whereas Aragorn, you consistently pay 1 resource to make sure that Aragorn's ready after questing, for Imrahil, it's a little bit trickier, so there has to be a character leaving play. But both of these heroes can have up to 1 bonus action per round. I think you definitely hit the nail on the head when you say you have to build a deck around Prince Imrahil, using things like maybe chump blockers that are going to be brought into play so you can commit Prince Imrahil to the quest. You can have some sort of chump ally end up dying, and then Imrahil himself can maybe do a little bit of defending or attacking in return. I think he works particularly well with allies like the Westfold Horsebreaker, where they're designed specifically to leave play, or another card that we're going to be talking about in this adventure pack, which is Escort from Edoras, kind of a one-time use, really strong questing character. So I definitely like Prince Imrahil in that he's able to give players a lot of action advantage for nowhere near as much of a resource investment as Aragorn might cost. So if you're planning on doing a lot of chump blocking anyways, you're not going to have that added expense that Aragorn might cost you. But at the same time, he's got a little bit of added vulnerability. So during the quest phase, he's left exhausted, whereas Aragorn is ready. So especially some of the treachery cards we're going to see here in A Journey to Rhosgobel, like Exhaustion and the Necromancer's Reach, are going to be much more prone to damaging Prince Imrahil, but especially in a multiplayer game, he will generally ready once per round to the maximum of 1 without costing nearly as many resources as Aragorn, so a little bit trickier, but probably a fairly reliable effect. But in any case, why don't we go ahead and take a look at the leadership player cards introduced in this pack, the first of which is Dunadan Quest, which at a cost of 2 is an attachment. It has the trait Signal, and it reads, attached to a hero. Attached hero gains +1 willpower, and action, pay 1 resource from attached hero's pool to attach Dunadan Quest to another hero. So the immediate comparison that comes to mind for me is the spirit card, The Favor of the Lady. So it's 2 resources for a gain of 1 willpower. I do like that overall. I think attachments are a little bit more resilient to damage than allies are. There are far fewer effects that can remove attachments from play than allies. They're never going to end up being killed by enemies or, direct damage effects. But what I don't like about this card is that there's already a number of established leadership cards that benefit the more allies that you have. So effects like For Gondor, where each additional ally gets an attack boost, or Faramir, where all additional allies gain a +1 willpower boost. So if you were to, say, pick a guard at the Citadel instead of Dunadan quest, it would be able to generate twice as much questing potential as soon as you have Faramir on the table.
I think Dunadan Quest is interesting in that, unlike the previous 2 Dunadan cards we've seen in this cycle, it cost 2 as opposed to 1. So for the Dunadan Mark and the Dunadan Warning, they each were adding +1 attack strength or +1 defense strength, and they only cost 1. Here we're looking at our final attribute, which is willpower, and it still only adds 1, but it costs 2, which immediately brings to my mind the leadership attachment from the core set, Celebrian Stone, which also costs 2. It also has to attach to a hero, but it is restricted. But the hero gets +2 willpower. So you're paying the exact same amount for 1 less willpower, though it's not restricted, and it can be moved around from one hero to another. I suppose the other advantage would be that, unlike Celebrian Stone, Dunadan Quest isn't unique, so you could put up to 3 of these on any hero. More than that, of course, if multiple players are running Dunadan Quest in their deck. So, given the 3 Dunadan cards we've seen thus far, I would like this one the least, mainly because I'm wanting to boost attack or defense strength, but also just because of the cost. And as you said, Mitch, there are other ways for leadership, I think, to generate willpower, perhaps a bit more cost effectively.
Sure. I can't add anything else.
Well, let's take a look at our final leadership card for this adventure pack, which is Parting Gifts. It's an event that costs 0, and its action reads, move any number of resource tokens from a leadership hero's resource pool to any other hero's resource pool. I think this card can certainly be useful, especially if a leadership hero has the Steward of Gondor attached, so they're generating 3 resources per turn, and maybe they're not able to spend all of those resources. But outside of that, I'm not sure how useful this card is going to be. It's, if you don't want to run songs in your deck, this could be a way to send a bunch of resources from one hero to another without putting a song on them. It's not going to be vulnerable to attachment removal by the encounter deck because it simply is an event, but as you say so often in our series, Mitch, if I drew this as my card draw for the turn, I'm not too sure I'd be thrilled about that, or how, other than knit situations, I'm not sure it would get me out of a jam.
I think there are definitely some situations where this would be really useful. I generally only run maybe 1 leadership character. I tend to rely on a lot of really cheap leadership cards. Sometimes it happens that I just have a bunch of unused resources. In some situations, you can maybe combo this with Song of Kings. So if there's one character that has a ton of unused resources, like if you end up putting Steward of Gondor on someone and they just don't use the massive amount of resources that they can build up, I think that's a really good way to turn a character into a leadership hero so that they're an eligible target for this. I definitely think you can also use it in multiplayer games to really boost one character's resource amount so that they can afford expensive characters like Bjorn, or maybe Northern Tracker, or multiple Forest Snares, effects like that. But I really feel like the more card draw a player has, this maybe in some ways gets less valuable, just because you've got more options to spend the hero that has a lot of resources to spend some of their wealth on. So this is kind of a strange card for me. I definitely think, just like Prince Imrahil, this doesn't just go into any deck. You've got to do quite a bit of deck building expecting to get some sort of big advantage from this one. So it could work out, it could not. At the present moment, until a deck really can rely on Parting Gifts, I'll probably keep this one in the binder. But onto our tactics cards for this adventure pack, the first of which is an ally, unique, named Landroval. It is a 5 cost, 1 willpower, 3 attack, 1 defense, 4 hit point creature and eagle with the Sentinel keyword, and Landroval cannot have restricted attachments, and his ability reads, Response. After a hero card is destroyed, return Landroval to his owner's hand to put that hero back into play with 1 damage token on it, but limit once per game. What I definitely do like about this guy is, first of all, he's an eagle, so in the Journey to Rhosgobel Adventure Pack, we have to fight enemies like the Mirkwood Flock and Black Forest Bats that can only be defended against by eagles or ranged characters. So he's obviously useful in that respect. He does have a token drop of willpower to boost tactics players. He does have pretty solid attack strength despite his expense. He's a fairly solid defending character. But what I like about Landroval is you don't have to just deal with losing a character and then having to build up resources in order to afford a fortune or fate and then bringing the character back during the next turn's planning. This is very much the hero dies, it's a tragic event. Of course, it's still stripped of all of its attachments, still stripped of all of its resource tokens, but Landroval can bounce back into your hand, maybe trigger effects like Horn of Gondor, Prince Imrahil, and then your hero comes back into play with one damage token on it. So, especially in a Journey to Rhosgobel, I feel like it's probably going to be pretty common for heroes to die, and this is a much more proactive than reactive effect, like one might see from Fortune or Fate.
Sure, by and large I agree. I think Landroval has a hefty price, but he has nice stats. You already mentioned Fortune or Fate, which is a card that instantly springs to mind when thinking of Landroval. But I also think of the leadership ally Brock Ironfist, who has a similar effect. Brock Ironfist costs 1 more at 6. He has 2 willpower, 2 attack, 1 defense, 4 hit points. So his stats are very similar to Landroval's, but for Brock Ironfist's ability to work, you have to have a dwarf hero leave play and then play Brock Ironfist from your hand. So the advantage of Landroval, as you were sort of hinting at, is that he can already be on the table. You can have Landroval questing or attacking or defending, and then if a hero happens to die, Landroval swoops down and sort of saves them, and your hero comes back. Brock Ironfist has to be in your hand, and again, can only exchange with a dwarf hero. That's very limited. Fortune or Fate, again, is a very expensive card that you may not be able to save up for, or maybe your partners won't be able to save up for. So while he is an expensive eagle, I think he definitely has a great ability, and you'll probably be seeing him in my deck soon.
Yeah, I think really my only lingering concerns about this guy is since Bjorn, like we've experienced almost, well, I guess we've never seen Bjorn see play. In my personal experiences outside of Sneak Attack, we haven't really seen Bjorn on the table. It's just that 5 strikes me as so expensive, and I'm wondering how this guy compares unfavorably or favorably in a lot of situations compared to something like Citadel play, but I suppose we'll certainly have to see. And for those of you following the progression of the Eagle deck, we've certainly got the Eagles Are Coming as an event that might be used to retrieve this guy. He's our second Eagle player card, so again, we'll just have to keep our eye on that card and Landroval as the Eagle trait develops.
Sure. Our final tactics card for the A Journey to Rhosgobel Adventure Pack is To the Eyrie, which is an event that costs 2. Response reads, after an ally is destroyed, exhaust 1 eagle character to move that ally from the discard pile to its owner's hand. I wrote 2 words for my show notes here, which are limited usefulness. If this was a card that dealt with heroes, especially at the cost of 2, I think it might be worthwhile. I'm not sure that there are any allies, with the exception of Gandalf, at this point that I would really want to play an event, include an event in my deck that costs 2 in order to exhaust an eagle character, if they happen to even be in play, to move that ally from my discard pile to my hand. I don't like the cost. I don't like that you have to have an eagle ally character in play and then exhaust them to get this ally back. I'm not even sure all of these conditions are worth rescuing Gandalf, to be completely honest. So I can't see myself ever including this card in my deck unless there just is some stellar ally that happens to come out that you never want to lose, and I just don't see that really being the case.
Yeah, especially since we can peek ahead something like 12 adventure packs, 2 deluxe expansions, and 1 saga expansion. I've yet to really see an ally that this would be a really good card for, but I think you perfectly talked about it. The cost of using this card beyond its, resource investment is just astronomical. The amount of eagles that we have are very low. One of them is unique and costs 5, the other is 2. Generally, you're going to be using them for questing or attacking or defending. They're not going to be unexhausted. You only get to pull the ally back to your hand, so chances are you'll have to pay for it 100% all over again. It's really probably uncommon that we've come into some sort of effect that's going to destroy a character like Gandalf. So, unless you're playing a Journey to Rhosgobel and you happen to pull like a double exhaustion that'll actually kill Gandalf, I just can't imagine anything that would get him out of play. Maybe you can benefit if you retrieve some sort of ally that has an when enters play trick, but really, it's almost laughably expensive. And to the Eyrie, I don't know if I've ever heard of anyone bothering to include this in their deck, so I would definitely encourage players to use some other tactics card to fill the void in their deck.
Right. Part of me wonders if this card was perhaps designed for Radagast. He's an ally that we'll get to in a moment. He's the new neutral ally for this set, who's very key to Eagle decks and perhaps even key to this scenario. And he might be another ally for this quest that you really don't want to leave your hand. We can maybe talk about that more when we discuss his card, but even still, I don't think that Gandalf or Radagast are really worth the investment of this card.
In any case, on to our spirit cards, the first of which is a new ally called Escort from Edoras. So this is a cost of 2, with 2 willpower, 0 attack, 0 defense, and 1 hit point. It is a Rohan ally, and while committed to a quest, Escort from Edoras gets +2 willpower. But it has a forced effect. After resolving a quest to which Escort from Edoras was committed, discard Escort from Edoras from play. I definitely like the fact that this is a 4 willpower character for a cost of 2. It is really unfortunate both that it's so fragile, so it's very likely to die from questing effects, especially in a Journey to Rhosgobel itself, when there's just countless treacheries that could easily kill this guy and cost the players countless resources. But I do definitely like that he's able to contribute solid willpower when it comes to overcoming some seemingly insurmountable wall of threat in the staging area, like during Conflict at the Carrack, when the 4 trolls enter the staging area. So all of a sudden it's 8 additional threat. Maybe you have a copy or 2 of River Langflood, which gets 2 threat +1 for each troll in play. So it's definitely useful in a sticky situation. I think it's great comboed with Prince Imrahil. It works with effects like Horn of Gondor, Stand and Fight, and Dwarven Tomb. But overall, I think it's a very situational guy, so he's definitely not useful in any scenario.
I agree with you 100%, Mitch. I don't think I have anything worthwhile to add. On the other hand, though, I have lots to say about Ancient Mathom, and it's nothing but good things. So this is our final spirit card for the pack. It costs 1. It's an attachment with the trait Mathom. It must attach to a location, and its response read, after attached location is explored, the first player draws 3 cards. I think a couple of things when I look at this card. One is it's sort of Spirit's way of encroaching, I feel, on Lore's territory of card draw, but that doesn't make the card unwelcome. I love the cost of 1. I love the fact that you get to draw 3 cards. If there's any drawback, is that it's the first player who draws the cards, not the owner of the Ancient Mathom. But either way, it's a cooperative game. We're all in this together. So if you don't get the benefit, I suppose that's not a bad thing.
Yeah, it definitely compares favorably to an effect like Lore's Lorien Wealth, where for 3 resources it's 3 cards. This, of course, has a little bit of an added requirement in that you have to explore a location, but Spirit generally excels at doing that, so I don't really see that as too much of a hindrance. Just like I touched on in the Hunt for Gollum video, I do think that this is kind of a messy card draw effect, so even though the players are both benefiting from it, whether it's a 2, 3, 4, or single-player game, sometimes if you're really trying to laser focus and have one character dig for a really important attachment or event, it's going to be a little bit frustrating when Ancient Mathom triggers for the wrong player. It definitely combos perfectly with the lore ally Erebor Hammersmith, so this is definitely going to be an attachment that you'll see in your discard pile that you're going to want to get back into play, and even the leadership event, Second Breakfast, is going to be fantastic in just trying to allow players to play Ancient Mathom just as many times as possible.
One interesting thing about this card that I mentioned is that it has to attach to a location. And there's lots of locations in the game that say they are immune to player card effects. So I was wondering how this Ancient Mathom would interact with those cards. So I emailed FFG, and Caleb, one of the designers for the game, actually wrote me back, and here's what he said. You can play attachments on locations that are immune to player card effects. If a card can't have attachments, then it will read cannot have attachments. However, cards that are immune to player card effects will be immune to the abilities of attachments. So you can play cards like Power in the Earth on locations like the Carrick, but it will have no effect on that location. Cards like Ancient Mathom, though, work differently because they don't actually affect the location, so their abilities still work. So you can play an attachment like this on any location that says immune to player card effects because it doesn't. The Mathom's effect doesn't actually affect the location, it affects the player, so I think that just adds to its utility.
I definitely agree. I think this is far more useful when you're finding yourself playing a scenario like Conflict at the Carrick, where there's one big, daunting, looming location that is utterly immune to player card effects, so this still allows players to benefit from that absolutely ridiculous card draw. But onto our lore cards in this adventure pack, we have the unique ally Haldir of Lorien, which for a cost of 4 is 2 willpower, 2 attack, 2 defense, 3 hit points, has the Sylvan trait, and the ranged and sentinel keywords. I think this is fantastic in that it's kind of doing a little bit more intersphere blending. So just like Ancient Mathom was kind of borrowing a little bit of card draw from the lore sphere, this is giving the lore sphere much more potent questing ability, much more potent combat and defensive ability than a lot of the other cards we've seen so far for lore. I definitely like that it's got ranged, so it's not only useful in this adventure pack, but if you've got a strong other player that's maybe running tactics and leadership with you, you're maybe able to contribute to some of his or her attacks. Sentinel is fantastic. I love being able to defend for any player, and seeing as how Haldir is starting off as a lore character with that 2 defense and 3 hit points, he might even be a contender to go ahead and slap a Burning Brand on him. I think he's really, really good for the Journey to Rhosgobel scenario, specifically just with that combo alone, but I find him to be the perfect supporting character if you need him to do a little bit of questing, a little bit of attacking, defending. He's able to perform very well in each of those roles, and for a cost of 4 and being unique, for 1 cost beyond Rivendell Minstrel, he's got an additional 2 attack, 2 hit points, and 2 defense with those keywords, so even though he seems a little bit expensive, I think you're definitely getting your money's worth.
I absolutely agree. Once again, I have nothing to add. High cost, but a great ally. So that brings us to our final lore card for this adventure pack, which is an event, Infighting. It costs 1, and its action reads, move any number of damage from one enemy to another. I think there are maybe a few uses for this card. The first is if your deck isn't maybe all that strong on attack, you could transfer some enemy damage from a weaker enemy to a more potent or sturdier enemy that has a defense that you maybe can't quite crack. The other use that's perhaps more relevant to this particular quest is the Mirkwood Flock and the Black Forest Bats that Mitch was talking about earlier. These 2 particular enemies can only be defended against or attacked by a ranged character. And that's an ability on an enemy that we actually see recur in later cycles. And it's very frustrating. So if you don't have any range in your deck, or your ranged characters have died, or you just haven't drawn them yet, this is one way to deal with those very annoying enemies that are otherwise very difficult to attack. With that said, I still think I would rather include more ranged in my deck if the enemies require that. I'm not entirely convinced that this warrants a spot in my deck.
There are definitely some tricky uses for it, just like you were saying. Let's say you have a low defense enemy like Dol Guldur Beastmaster, and you're maybe able to drop a forest snare onto it. If you can kind of pick away at it, let's say you don't have any enemies coming off the encounter deck that round, you can kind of save up a little bit of damage on a squishy target so that you don't outright kill it, and then, in between staging and quest resolution, maybe you want to do something tricky like infight the damage off of that weakened target onto something so it doesn't, first of all, it doesn't contribute its threat versus the players during quest resolution, and then maybe you kill it outright before it has some opportunity to attack the players. But I feel like there's quite a bit of work that has to go into making this work, and just like you were saying, I think I'm a lot more inclined to try and build my deck around just being able to destroy enemies outright than, allowing one enemy to remain in play and attack me turn after turn, just so I can use it as some sort of damage sponge and then transfer off of it. So it just seems a little bit strange. It's definitely got its uses, but overall this just doesn't really play to the way that I like to approach this game. But in any case, why don't we go ahead and cover our second neutral character and our final player card of this adventure pack, who is Radagast. He is a unique Istari ally with a cost of 5, and he has 2 willpower, 1 attack, 1 defense, and 3 hit points. And his card reads, Radagast collects 1 resource each resource phase. These resources can be used to pay for creature cards played from your hand. Action. Spend X resources from Radagast's pool to heal X wounds on any one creature. So I definitely think he's a valuable addition to, say, Eagle decks in particular. That's really the only creature allies that we've seen, Winged Guardian and Landroval specifically. I do like that it's 2 willpower on a neutral character, and even though he's nowhere near as powerful as someone like Gandalf, he at least stays in play, he accrues an extra resource every turn, and in a lot of ways it kind of allows him to pay for himself. But he definitely is pretty expensive, his stats are pretty weak, he's not the most fragile quester in the world. Even though we are limited to only having 2 different eagles to build decks with, his ability can be useful time to time, but what are your thoughts?
Largely the same as yours. He has the same cost as Gandalf, as you mentioned, but for lesser stats. But I think he, again, makes up for it because he collects resources. I know that when I've made Eagle decks, I have always included Radagast, and he's come in quite handy. He is an investment to get out on the table, but if you know he's in your deck, you sort of know you want to save up for him, especially once you draw him. So, I think he's almost a auto-include for any deck that's built around creatures, which at this point is pretty much an Eagle deck. There are a few other creatures that exist, though not many. So, he's definitely not for all decks, but if you're wanting to go Eagles, I think Radagast is a must.
Yeah, I definitely think his willpower helps tactics overall, just because they're really the Eagles deck is tactics, or very heavy tactics.
Mm-hmm.
The earlier you can get him into play, the bigger benefit you can see from his ability. The only trick with him is, apart from the obvious use in healing Williador during a journey to Rhosgobel, his action is a little bit clunky, so you can spend some of his resources to heal a creature, but at the present moment, Winged Guardian has 1 hit point and Landroval has 4. Some of the other Eagles we're going to see have 2 hit points, some of them have 1 hit points, so I definitely use him more for getting cards into play than healing anything. But be that as it may, since we've gone ahead and covered our 10 new player cards of this adventure pack, do you have any overall thoughts, Matthew, on the strengths or weaknesses of this allotment of cards?
Like the first 2 adventure packs, I think there are some cards that are a hit, and I think there's some cards that are a miss. I think Prince Imrahil is a good hero, provided you are able to build around him. So he's not just someone you're going to slap into a deck and hope he works well. You'd really want to take advantage of that ability. The leadership cards I'm not really a fan of. I do like Landroval. I like both of the spirit cards. I like Haldir, and I like Radagast. Though I can't say that most of these cards are powerhouses and remain relevant far after this quest. I will say that A Journey to Rhosgobel is one of my favorite adventure packs from the Shadow of Mirkwood cycle. A lot of these cards, I think, work well for this particular quest. So I think it's a solid adventure pack, perhaps not the best one we've ever seen.
Yeah. I definitely think Prince Imrahil can lead players to develop really, really resource-efficient decks. So leadership already excels at resource acceleration, but if you're pumping fewer resources into keeping Imrahil ready, as opposed to, paying Aragorn's quest and ready upkeep, I think you can use plenty of those resources on other cards. The natural, ebb and flow of a game is that there are generally a lot of allies leaving play, especially in multiplayer games. I think Imrahil can be extremely strong, even though he's not really a hero I've gravitated toward historically. I think Dunadan Quest is definitely a little overexpensive for the benefit you get. Parting Gifts is very situational. Landroval, in his day, is pretty effective. It's not too often that I lose heroes, but again, he's another strong eagle card. He works perfectly well with Radagast, and once, we start seeing more and more eagles, their synergy starts to build, we involve the eagles are coming, that makes for a very strong deck. And then Spirit, I feel like they got some fantastic cards. Escort from Edoras, I love in being able to just contribute such a massive chunk of willpower toward questing. Ancient Mathom is absolutely fantastic card draw, and even though I don't use these lore cards very often, Haldir can be exceptionally powerful, especially if you've got a lot of lore resources trickling in. So overall, it seems like we're probably saying this a lot, but this adventure pack is kind of a mixed bag. So I think there's definitely some absolutely stellar player cards in this. There's some that are kind of duds in a lot of ways, but I guess we'll just kind of have to see where development goes from here and see if any of these end up having some really powerful quest-specific uses. But with that said, have you got any final thoughts about this adventure pack you feel are worth letting the world know?
I think I'm good.
Alright, well, with that said, then thank you guys, as always, for checking out yet another episode of the LOTR LCG Progression Series. Next up is going to be our actual playthrough of the A Journey to Rhosgobel scenario. So until then, be sure to click the like button on this video if you enjoyed what you saw. Feel free to subscribe to our channel if you'd like to see more content like this in the future. If you feel like we've forgotten any especially powerful or clever uses for some of these player cards, feel free to let us know in the comments below. But with that said, we'll see you guys next time.